All right, so let's get into what was by far the best weekend in college football of the season. And I've spent a lot of time talking about this, but listen, it's been a little bit of a frustrating year in college football because there haven't been a ton of marquee matchups. For whatever reason, the ones that have been there just really haven't lived up to the hype. Now, look, LSU Texas was awesome earlier in the year. Oregon Auburn came down to the wire. But for the most part, it's been a lot of duds. I mean, Clemson A&M was a dud. Alabama A&M this weekend was a dud. Clemson Syracuse was a dud. So there haven't been a ton of big games, but it's kind of what I told you guys last week, right? Is you got to be patient. There's a reason that you don't eat ice cream for dinner and you don't eat it as an appetizer. You eat it for dessert. You save the best for last. And so what I think happened is that we have had a very quiet first 5 weeks of college football. And you know what happened? Or first 6 weeks, I guess. You know what happened? It's set up for an unbelievable week 7. But you know what the great thing about college football is? We came into this weekend and we were sure, I was positive, that I was going to open this show today and I was going to be talking Oklahoma, Texas. What's up with Oklahoma? Is Texas good? What's the story there? LSU, Florida. Maybe I'd talk that. Maybe I'd talk Alabama A&M if A&M could keep things close. No, I'm going to talk about the South Carolina Gamecocks and the Georgia Bulldogs. But this is what makes college football great, right? You think you know what the storyline is going to be going into a weekend, and then something absolutely absurd happens. And this is what's great about the sport of college football, right? You go into a busy NBA Saturday, you don't think you're going to talk Warriors Spurs and end up talking Charlotte Hornets Milwaukee Bucks. Like, you don't do it. But college football, you never know where the storylines are going to come from. And today's biggest storyline comes from a place that I would have never expected it, and it is the South Carolina-Georgia game. And I can't lie, guys. I have never been more excited to talk about a college football game than this one because I have been telling you for a year, the Georgia Bulldogs are a fraud. They are the Enron of college football. I am so tired of them. I am so sick of them. This dates back to last year. It really dates back to 2 years ago. I am so sick of Georgia. I'm so sick of the media narrative around them. And I am so happy that they got what was coming to them this week. I should also, by the way, apologize to South Carolina because if you're listeners of this show, you know that after week 1, when South Carolina ended up losing to North Carolina in the season opener, I said, I'm never talking about South Carolina on the show again. They're the same team every year. They never beat any teams that matter. They're going to go 7-5. They're going to be boring. They play a boring style of football. And so South Carolina, I owe you an apology. I don't even know if there's any South Carolina fans that listen to this show, but if there are, I apologize. I was wrong about your program. And credit to you guys for one of the biggest wins, not only of this season, but in recent years for your program. The problem with this game, though, is that it's not really about South Carolina. What it's about is the Georgia Bulldogs. And I told you this. I said it right a minute ago. They are the Enron of college football. They are the biggest frauds going in sports, and I cannot be happier to talk about them today. And so to backtrack, if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me explain. And I know you guys do, but let's just kind of start from the top and let's go back. And that's obviously, look, we all know the story, right? Kirby Smart was at Alabama forever. He was Alabama's defensive coordinator. If you don't know who Kirby Smart is, Kirby Smart's the head coach at the University of Georgia. And he goes to Georgia, and Georgia had been good under Mark Richt, but they couldn't get over the top, and they ended up falling in big games. And eventually, like Georgia and Mark Richt, they just kind of got into this rut where it was 8, 9, 10 wins every year, but they were never really in the mix. So Kirby Smart gets there. Year 2, they go to the national championship game. Now, they were actually very lucky to get there because, as I'll explain in a minute, Oklahoma basically gagged away that game. We're going to talk a little bit about Oklahoma, but in the 2017-2018 college football playoff, Oklahoma gagged away the game against Georgia. But so Georgia gets the national championship game, and that is, of course, the famous game where Jalen Hurts is struggling. Alabama goes to the bench. They bring in Tua Tagovailoa. Tua leads Alabama on a drive to win the national championship. He becomes the hero, and of course, Georgia goes down in flames. And so then what happens? We go through all of last year. Georgia loses at LSU, but they do what they have to do. They finish the regular season 11-1. They win the SEC East, and they go to the SEC championship game. And what happens in the SEC championship game? Georgia goes up by 14 points, going into the second half. Alabama's starting quarterback again gets hurt, and of course, this time it was two of the starting quarterback. Alabama has to go to the backup, Jalen Hurts, and what happens? Jalen Hurts leads them to a comeback victory. And so Georgia, for a second year in a row, last year in the SEC championship game, had Alabama on the ropes and couldn't put them away. And so at the time, okay, when that game happens, okay, no big deal. It's an incredible game. It's an incredible effort. Georgia is in the same vicinity as Alabama, but they're not Alabama. They can't close against Alabama. It's fine. There's a lot of programs that have been really close to Alabama but haven't really been able to get over the top. The only one that's been able to get over the top in the last decade really is Clemson. And so I thought that was it. I thought Georgia, they finished 11-2. They lost the SEC championship game. It was a nice season. Let's give them credit for that. And they'll go to whatever bowl game and we'll move on and we'll go on to the playoff. But you know that's not what happened. You know what happened from there. All of a sudden, Georgia goes to the podium and they claim that because they played Alabama tougher than anybody, that they deserve a shot in the playoff. Now keep in mind, they weren't undefeated coming into this game. They had already lost to the second best team on their schedule, which was LSU, but they claimed that because they were close to Bama, because they tried really hard, because they were so close and Bama's the number one team in the country, they deserve a shot. They should be in the playoff. And my head exploded. I was like, what are you talking about? You just lost to Alabama. You don't get another shot at them. Especially last year, if you remember the way that the playoff was structured, Alabama finished undefeated, Clemson finished undefeated, Notre Dame finished undefeated. Then you had Oklahoma, which was a one-loss Big 12 champ. They avenged the only loss on their schedule, which was to Texas. You had Ohio State, which was a one-loss Big 10 champ. And then you have Georgia. 2 losses, more losses than anybody else, not an SEC champ, claiming that they deserve a spot in the playoff because they played Alabama so close. I remember sitting there thinking, you got to be insane. You got to be insane. And so they played up this narrative for the entire 12-hour period between when the SEC championship game ended and when the Final Four was announced. And I remember going on my radio show that night with Arnie Spanier saying, these guys are crazy. This isn't Little League. This isn't Pop Warner. You don't get credit for close wins. You got to win games. You got to win games. And so Georgia whined and complained, and credit to the playoff committee because they did end up putting Oklahoma in as the 4th team in the college football playoff. Georgia got sent to the Sugar Bowl. What happened? They got smoked by Texas. Well, and of course, when that happened, they couldn't focus because they thought they should be in the playoff. I don't care why you couldn't focus. You lost the game. You lost to Bama, then you lost to Texas. You lost to 3 out of the 4 best teams on your schedule, maybe 3 out of the best 5, because last year they beat Florida and Kentucky, which were both pretty good in the SEC East. But the bottom line is you lost a couple big games. And by the way, that Bama team that you were claiming, we were so close, Bama lost to Clemson. So Bama wasn't even the best team in the country last year. But Georgia put on this big front, And so my whole thing with Georgia for a year has been that they are the biggest fraud in sports. They are the only team that I've been watching sports for 30 years. I'm in my early to mid-30s now. I can remember sports back to 1991, 1992. Okay, so it's 27, 28 years. I mean, I have never, ever in all my time watching sports seen a team get so much credit for close losses as Georgia. Like I said, they're the Enron of College Football. They're a complete fraud. You don't get credit for close losses. This is big boy college football. I use the analogy on my radio show on Saturday night. Can you imagine if the Houston Rockets are in the NBA playoffs and they play Golden State and they lose the Western Conference Finals in 7 games like they did 2 years ago? And then the Rockets went to the podium and said, yeah, I know we lost, but, rather than putting Cleveland in the finals, we should get to play the Warriors again in the finals. Why? That makes no sense, right? So the Houston Rockets losing the Western Conference Finals to the Warriors, would the Rockets ever go to the podium and claim, well, we deserve another shot. We deserve another shot at them? No, of course not. That's absurd. Only that's exactly what Georgia's was claiming. And so what I'm saying with Georgia is this. I've never seen a team in all my time covering sports that has ever gotten more credit for close losses than the University of Georgia. Their whole facade, everything they're about, has been built on almost beating Bama. And I'm so sick of this crap. Everybody else in college football, you got to actually win games. Clemson's got to win games to make the playoff. You know why we're talking about Clemson potentially surpassing Bama as the best program? It's because Clemson's beaten them twice in the last 3 years. That's why we're talking about Clemson. But we're talking about Georgia because the games were close. Give me a break. So you talk about a program that's been claiming that they're this close to Bama and they're 1 or 2 plays away 2 years in a row. Well, you didn't get it done. And you don't get credit for close losses. And so I was so happy yesterday to see, one, I'm happy for South Carolina because, by the way, I should mention, Georgia was at home. South Carolina was down to their third-string quarterback by the end of the day, and South Carolina still won between the hedges. Now, I will say this. I did think it was going to be closer than people expected because I do think that Georgia, even against Tennessee last week, I do think that it was a little bit of a weird situation where if you watch the Tennessee game, it felt like Georgia came out really flat and they kind of just felt like, okay, whatever. We just got to win this. We just got to win a couple games. We'll play Florida. If we beat Florida, we'll play Alabama in the SEC championship game. And I did think that they were already unfocused, so I thought this game would be closer. I didn't think they'd actually lose. But this shows you that they're not right on Alabama's heels. They lost to an unranked team as a 3-touchdown underdog at home. You know the last time that Alabama lost to an unranked team? Keep in mind, this was the third unranked team that Kirby Smart lost to since he got to Georgia, by the way, but neither here nor there. You know the last time Alabama lost to an unranked team? 2007. 2007. Nick Saban's first year. They have now won 87 straight games against unranked teams. Georgia just lost to South Carolina as a 3-touchdown favorite at home. South Carolina third-string quarterback. But you're trying to tell me that Georgia is right on Alabama's doorstep? Stop! Stop! Get out of here. It's ridiculous. And so I want to give South Carolina credit, but I also want to talk about the story, which is Georgia, which I've just spent the last 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes talking about. And that is that it is absurd that we ever put Georgia on the pedestal with Alabama. Now, look, if you want to talk about Georgia being a good program, that's fine. If you want to put them on the same level as, say, Oklahoma or LSU or whoever, a team that's really close, that's really good, that's winning 8, 9, 10, 11 games a year, that just hasn't broke through and won a championship, I can rock with that. I can rock with, over the last 3 years, Georgia is one of the 3 or 4 best programs in college football. But Alabama's the gold standard. Clemson's right on their heels. And then there's a big gap. And then I think you could put Oklahoma in there. I think you could put Ohio State, which has at least won a national championship in the last couple of years. And you could put Georgia. Maybe you could put a couple other teams too. But the point is, this whole facade, everything that Georgia's about has been built on close losses. I've never seen anything like it. And I'm so happy that they got their humble pie. And it was crazy because I really, on my Twitter feed, at Aaron_Torres, I really went after Georgia. And I'll give Georgia fans credit. Usually when you're as emphatic as I was, you get pushback from the fan base. Even the fan base is like, no, man, you're right. We got sold a false bill of goods. We got sold that we're right there. Bama doesn't lose these games. Bama doesn't lose to unranked opponents at home when they're 3-touchdown favorites. So stop. Like I said, Georgia is the Enron of college football. They're a fraud. Their whole facade has been built on close losses to Bama. And I will say one more thing on Georgia and we'll move on. You want to prove me wrong? Now's the time. I'm laying down the hammer to Georgia. It's October 13th. You guys are listening on October 14th. Georgia, if you're the real deal, if you really are on Bama's level, on Oklahoma's level, on Clemson's level, you know what? Guess what? I will defend you on this. The road is right in front of you. If Georgia wins out, they will make the college football playoff, and they will have a chance to compete for a national championship. Because, look, it doesn't really matter, right? One loss. If they win out, they're going to win the SEC East. They'll go to the SEC championship game where they'll either play LSU or Alabama. They win that game, they'll go to the playoff. They might even be the number 1 seed, depending on how everything else shakes out. I don't think they're going to get there, because if you look at their schedule, they still have Florida, which we're going to talk about in a second, but I think Florida's really, really good. They still have to play Missouri, which is really, really, really good. And they still have to play at Auburn. And that's just to get to the SEC championship game to play Alabama. I think they're taking at least one more loss in the regular season. And then, if they can even get to the SEC championship game, we'll see what happens if they play Alabama or LSU. but I'm so happy. I'm so happy for South Carolina. I'm so happy for their fans, and I'm so happy that Georgia got exposed for the frauds that they are. I never bought them. I never bought that they were on the doorstep of Alabama. Like I said, Alabama hasn't lost to an unranked team since 2007. Georgia lost to one at home. They are the Enron of college football. They're fake. They're frauds. They're phonies. Good program, not elite. And let's move on.